This is Zander Abrams, and you're listening to the Matt Balaker podcast.
Hello, good people out there. Thank you for tuning in to the Matt Balaker podcast. It makes me feel purposeful, happy, and just overall joyous. And if you want to get extra credit, please encourage your friends to like, subscribe, and share. Well, we are in for a treat today because today's guest is the greatest Minnesota to Los Angeles import since the Lakers. He's the founder of the Cannabis Policy Forum, where he analyzes cannabis politics, policy, and regulation. He worked for AIPAC. He has great hair. He's a lawyer, but we will not hold that against him. Please join me in welcoming Zander Abrams to the Matt Balaker podcast. How you doing, Zander?
Hey, Matt. Thank you for having me on. How are you?
I am, my hair's not quite, as tight and sharp as yours. So I'm a little insecure, but other than that, I'm great. So thank you for joining us. So we touched on it briefly, Zander. You were at AIPAC for how many years was that?
I was there from 2014 to 2019.
Okay. So you had a good tenure. How did that start?
So my relationship with AIPAC really started when I was in college. So I'd have to go back to 2006 when I was at the University of Minnesota. And I
go first. Sorry.
Go raw.
Raw.
And I was really active in politics growing up. My dad was a state representative for 18 years.
Wow.
He was elected from 3 months after I was born, and then he left office and became a judge when I moved out of the house. So politics was something that was always really, really important to me growing up. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like a strange thing. It was, oh yeah, of course, my dad works at the Capitol. That's where I go every day when I want to see him. So when I went to college, I knew I wanted to be politically active. And what I really liked about AIPAC is, one, as a Jew, Israel is important to me. But putting that aside, I thought that the politics around it was really interesting. And AIPAC is a bipartisan organization, meaning they work equally with both Democrats and Republicans. And I wasn't interested in partisan politics. I wasn't interested in being a Republican saying Democrats are the worst thing ever, and being a Democrat saying the Republicans are the worst thing ever.
How are you going to get elected if you don't pick a team and root for your team and then, denounce the other one wholeheartedly? How does that work?
So that's interesting. So it's a total change in mindset. You're not seeking to be elected, but what you're seeking to do is work with whomever is in power, whether it be a Republican or a Democrat. And you can't just, what happens if you're all Republican and the Democrats get elected? Your issue goes out the window for 4 years or 6 years. So I really like the nonpartisan or the bipartisan character of AIPAC and the level of leadership, lay leader, member of Congress, elected official that they engage. So I was super active in college. I lobbied pretty heavily on Iran refined petroleum sanctions and other pro-Israel measures. In college, I lobbied every office in the Minnesota Congressional Delegation. I was going to Washington at least once a quarter as a student to lobby there and go to conferences. And then everything kind of crescendoed into me speaking at AIPAC's National Policy Conference in front of a group.
While most people are doing keg stands and vomiting on themselves, you're speaking to Congress, or
right?
Wow. Please continue.
It's an and proposition.
Oh, okay.
Including for members of Congress, by the way. So everything kind of crescendoed into me speaking to a group of 8,000 people, which was really cool and was kind of a aha moment for what you can do, what you can accomplish. And I went to law school after that, moved back to Minnesota, practiced law, and really got involved in politics as the political director on a statewide governor campaign.
I want to pause just briefly because you have a very unique background. In fact, we have lots of people on the show, and many of them, if they talk politics, it's kind of tongue in cheek, but it's generally not a good thing. You are unique in that you were sort of born into it. And you have a kind of a nonpartisan, or maybe we'll call it bipartisan approach, which again I think is there's you and 4 other people on the planet. And I think, I think that's awesome. I think more of us should aspire to be like that. But what's something positive, you can say about America's political system, if there is anything?
Oh man.
Or maybe your experiences therein.
So I can only speak to my direct experience in it. And I think that and when I was at AIPAC, we can get into that. And I covered 35 members of the House, 8 United States senators. I did candidate meetings with every single declared candidate. I and other members of our staff did meetings with every single declared candidate for Congress. So I met with so many mayors, city council members, state representatives, governors, whomever. And what I will say is, at the core, for most of the people I interacted with, there is a piece of them that is doing it because they want to make the world better. They want to make society better. It's just how they think about it might be different, but I find that the motivation, in part at least, tends to be coming from a place of good, not trying to destroy or hurt others.
Well, that's not bad. That's not bad. So, I remember talking to you a while back about some of the stuff you learned at AIPAC. And I think this might translate broadly to people who are interested in sales or just, really any business where relationships matter, which is essentially all of them. You had a different approach. It wasn't just like, I want to bring in X amount of money this quarter or this time period. Please share with our audience how you handled this.
Right. So kind of fast forwarding through my bio, I was a political director on a governor's campaign in Minnesota after law school. And then I was recruited by AIPAC. And the then regional director at the time reached out to me and he said, have you ever considered working for AIPAC? And I was actually giving money to AIPAC. I was what they call a club member. So I was already contributing a check, like a real check. I think it was like $1,500 when I was giving when I was like 24 to AIPAC. Wow. And the role primarily was fundraising. It was overseeing the campaigns, AIPAC's campaigns throughout multiple states. And it started much smaller than where I finished, which means you did a good job. But I never viewed myself as a fundraiser. I never viewed my goal to be going into the room to walk out with a check. I never self-actualized that way. What I would do is my goal was to have a meaningful conversation, a real relationship, and have the person say at the end of the meeting, I really enjoyed meeting with Zander. I got something out of it. It was a good time. I enjoyed it. So through that, you get checks, you get money, you get the sale. But if you lead with, hey, I'm here to talk to you about your investment in the organization, it's not that great. I will also say the best meetings that I have had and the largest contributions, investments, however you want to categorize it, that I've been able to bring in over my years of fundraising for AIPAC, I did maybe 5% of the talking, and I did about 100% of the question asking. And so that's another lesson in sales and business and relationships. The quality of your life is the result of the quality of questions you ask. And so just ask good questions, listen, and that was my basic strategy. And through that, when I left AIPAC, I was covering Minnesota, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan. I had raised around $40 million for the organization and was consistently the number 3 in new money generation. And that's me in those states versus the guy who's covering Wall Street and the woman that was covering Los Angeles and the person who's covering San Francisco. And then there was just kind of me floating around what I consider kind of the best of the rest in the Midwest, like the not Chicago. But it was through that basic strategy and engagement.
So you're hitting up the bread belt and doing very well for yourself. I like that. So you grew up in the Midwest. You're doing very well out there, and then you move westward. Why?
Why indeed? Because I had a third life crisis. So I had hit 30, and I basically did an inventory, and I was like, okay, I've committed most of my life to politics, and I was just ready to move on to something else. And at AIPAC, I was doing a lot of public speaking. I was on the road basically every week, every other week for 5 years. I found I wasn't very present at family events. I wasn't as present as a friend. And I checked off a lot of the things I wanted to accomplish at AIPAC. Like I was giving the 15-minute AIPAC update at events meeting, 15 minutes, no notes, no nothing, the big pitch to ballrooms of 1,000+ people. It's like, okay, you did that. My last speaking gig was I interviewed Stephen Harper, who's the immediate past Prime Minister of Canada. And I was like, okay, this is a great way to end on. World leader, it's time to move on to the next chapter of my life. And looking at different verticals and seeing what's emerging. This is in 2018, and cannabis had just been legalized recreationally in California. And I thought to myself, this is going to be an interesting vertical. It allows me to have a competitive advantage because at the time, and you remember, Matt, I mean, you were in the industry when I was entering, like there weren't really impressive people there with real backgrounds. And so I thought I can skip to the head of the line. I don't need to start working on the operating floor and I can just dive right in. And then it's always that existential question. What do I do? Like, what's my role? And so
how do I fit into this ecosystem?
What do I do every day? Like, where do I fit in on the team? And what I found with cannabis is that it's so nascent that you can forge your own path. Like this isn't like one of the main things AIPAC lobbies for is the foreign aid bill to Israel and defense appropriation. So that's F-35 Joint Strike Fighters, that's Iron Dome surface air missile defense systems. And so if I wanted to make a lateral move, Lockheed Martin and Boeing, like those are really intense businesses, and I couldn't skip to the front of the line there. But cannabis, I also found interesting, Matt, because there's conflicts of law at every level between municipal, state, federal, and I also do a little bit of work internationally. I've done work in South Korea, Canada, and Israel. So those conflicts, and one deal with Germany. But so there's conflicts of law at every level. It's highly political. There's a need for capital. So all the stars were aligning. And I can tell you this, for the people that look at the cannabis industry now and they're like, oh, everyone's printing money. Like I came out to LA. I mean, this was in 2018, 2019 when I came out here because I also wanted to change the scenery. LA is the center of cannabis commerce in the world. It's the largest market in the world. But I remember lying in bed when I first made this move a few months in. You're counting the amount of money you have in your savings accounts. Like, okay, how many months do I have left? And I thought, did I make a massive miscalculation about cannabis? Like, is this industry only going to be kind of like a $5 billion thing? And like, did I make a mistake? And then now it's crazy how large the industry has proliferated.
Yeah. So you had various motivations. It wasn't just monetary, you want to kind of have a change of scenery, but you have a law background and you touched on it. It's still kind of the Wild West when it comes to legal cannabis. How did you find your niche in the market?
I think that and I credit AIPAC for this. The AIPAC's vice CEO, Richard Fishman, he instilled in us day one, it's okay to fail, but fail early and fail cheaply. And so
I like that, fail cheaply.
So I tried a number of things, but my beachhead was founding the Cannabis Policy Forum. I wanted to start as an analyst. I said, okay, I'm in Los Angeles, so it's a city I'm not from, and an industry that I have no obvious connection to. And I also, because I was coming from a really deep infrastructure where it's highly political, highly organized, and I'm not talking about like political in nature of their business, but I'm saying you take a political organization, the people that work there are political people.
Right.
So I was like, okay, I just want to be free. I want to do my own thing. So how do you do it? So I founded the Cannabis Policy Forum because I said, I'm going to start just writing about politics, policy, and regulatory issues. And that's it. And it's a great excuse to talk to people. Because if I call someone and just say, hey, I'm entering a new industry, will you talk to me? I need a job. No one's taking that call. But if I said, look, I'm writing an article on financial services and how that affects, your business, do you want to be quoted in it? you get a call back right away. Everyone wants
Sure.
to put it in an article or appear on a podcast. And
Right.
so I found that was my beachhead. Then I started doing operational consulting to help early stage technology companies kind of build out their operations, their HR, their teams, and build out business models. And then from there, it's just kind of, you can only move at the speed of your relationships. And so I got pulled in with a cannabis sale leaseback fund in Detroit through a gentleman named David Victor, who's a past president of AIPAC, who's a general partner of Coach Capital.
Two of the nicest people in the business, but go ahead.
Right. The managing partners, Sandy Cronenberg, Rob Feldman, who are partners of mine on another large transaction. And so from there, I started learning more about real estate finance, real estate and debt and credit and those picks and shovels of the industry. And so I use that as like an opportunity to learn and to complement the skills that I already had. And so I do primarily expansion planning for operators and help diligence and source deals for private investors that I know who I used to raise money from through AIPAC and a couple of different funds. And so it's a niche I fell into. When I first started saying I'm doing expansion planning for operators and I do public affairs, the cannabis operators in the room at an event in 2019, like their eyes glazed over, they're like, what markets are there to expand to?
Yeah.
But as my business has grown and my relationship network has grown, the type of deals and transactions and clients I've been working with has gotten better and better and better every year.
And what do you attribute that to?
I think that it comes back to what you said. And if there's one theme of this conversation, it's that relationships matter and make relationships that matter. And early on, I didn't have great pattern recognition of what's real, what's not, who's real, who's not. And I just felt like
in LA, that's even harder. Yes. Just assume no one is real and you'll probably be okay.
Just assume the Porsche that you see driving is paid for by investor money or debt finance, and the person didn't actually have the cash. That's kind of a lesson. So as my pattern recognition got better, I started meeting more people. And then a part of it, honestly, is just learning the job. And if you learn and understand your area of specialty and you have relationships in place, that can get you more deals, more business, all the better. So I always kind of have three things on my plate at any given time. And I always do like a self-inventory, and they keep getting better and better, higher quality people and deals. So my frame that for deciding to go in any project, and this is what I encourage anyone that I talk to who does their own thing. I only take on a project for three reasons. And this is also in order of importance. So number one, is it with people that I respect, that I appreciate, that respect me, and that give me energy? That's number one and is the most important. Number two, is it a project that I find interesting? Does it lead to something else? Like, is there something about this actual project that excites me? And then number three is the money. And what I've found is every time I've engaged on a project where number one, where the people weren't there and the project didn't excite me, but I just wanted cash. Yeah. Those are the only ones I've been stiffed on. Those are the deals that have blown up. Those have been the people that have caused me the most agitation. And so now if the first two elements aren't there or some element is, and I'm just really just doing it because there's a payday involved or a fee or something, I pass. I'm not doing it.
Yeah, you're flipping what I used to think when I was just out of college. It's like you really go for the process, because I used to say, "Oh, I'm results oriented," and so a result could be a bigger payday. But what you're showing is if you have other priorities, the money follows. And I think that I agree, but it took me almost 20 years to realize that. You came to California, especially California cannabis, at a very unique time because it was transitioning from kind of medical use, or I think it was we call it the 215 era, into adult use. Some call it rec. And I voted for it, and maybe it was a bad choice and I say this because on the surface, you're like, okay, it's more legal. That's good, and without doing a ton of homework. And some people were trying to talk me out of it. And I was like, it's not perfect, but it's an improvement. So I'm checking the box, in my opinion, for improvement. What is the reality? Do you think California is a freer market, a better market now that it's adult use, or not?
I think that California is probably one of the worst and best markets in America at the same time. And the reason why I say that is it's one of the best because of number 3, right? Number 3 on my list. There's the most amount of money here. It is a $4.5 billion recreational market. It is a $12.5 billion illegal market. The size of the California market in total is the size of the United States market, a little shy of every other state combined. That's California. So from that standpoint, it's great. However, the proliferation of the black market, the incredible taxes that are levied. I mean, even things people don't know about. I worked on a project in a mid-major city in California off the side of the highway, and the city's like, okay, it's $25,000 a month to us. Just for you to operate, in addition, just like an operation tax, another $25K that you're going to pay. That's like a mid-major small town. So there's more of that than I find in, say, Midwestern towns. And then also because of the taxes and the history, there's a lot of criminality in Los Angeles and Southern California in particular. The story of cannabis in San Francisco is a story of political activism. The story of cannabis in Los Angeles is a story of criminality and violence. And I find that is still true today. And, you layer on top of that how hard it is to get licenses, the social equity requirements for recreational and delivery licenses in Los Angeles. It's a cluster. And I thought it was kind of funny. The mayor hosted the mayor of London 2 months ago for a cannabis leadership roundtable for him to talk about the great program that we have in Los Angeles and how London should, can mirror it. And I was like, you shouldn't tell other people how to clean their house when you have a messy room.
Right.
The program here is it's been abysmal. And in spite of, it's like everything about California, in spite of itself, in spite of its government, in spite of its regulations, people are still making money and it's a profitable industry. But would I redo California cannabis, or California be a center for cannabis, knowing what I know now? I'd say absolutely. And I'd say absolutely because the credibility that you're able to build in other markets, when you kind of cut your teeth here, it translates. Like there's nothing I haven't seen working in California.
If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And you mentioned taxation, and some of the listeners of this are kind of, maybe more inside baseball when it comes to this, but many of them aren't. They think cannabis, weed, you're going to make boku bucks. What's the reality? Can you kind of walk us through, maybe compare it to the ice cream industry? Like if you buy some ice cream.
Well, I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds on the state municipal taxes. But just know that is incredible. I want to focus on federal issues.
Okay.
For this, just so it's general for everyone, but just know at the state and local level, for the end user, 35% tax. If you're a consumer, there's taxes at every single element along the supply chain. There's double and triple taxation throughout the industry. In California, it's terrible. Federally, you are unable to take advantage of fundamental tax credits and deductions that allow every other business in the United States to operate. If I can just switch back to the late 1970s in my home state of Minnesota, there was a guy who lived in St. Paul, was a drug dealer. He sold crack cocaine and marijuana. And this guy kept track of all of his business expenses. He kept track of his mileage.
He's a good accountant, yeah.
He kept track of his plastic bags. He kept track of his scales. He kept track of his cost for his firearm and his bullets. And when it came time for this gentleman to file his taxes, he declared those under Section 162A of the tax code, among others, which is ordinary and necessary business expenses. You deduct business expenses.
Mhm.
And so he files his taxes. The IRS denies him those deductions. He takes it to court, litigates the issue. And the tax court found just because it's an illegal enterprise does not mean that you, just as you still have to pay taxes, does not mean you can't not use deductions just because it's illegal. Like you have to pay taxes, the tax code still applies in total. So that ruling came down in the early 1980s. And Congress and the American public had a total conniption. And at that same time politically was Ronald Reagan's, more Nancy Reagan than Ronald Reagan's, just say no. And so as a response to that, Congress passed Section 280E of the federal code, meaning if you are doing something, if your economic activity is from a level 1 or level 2 scheduled drug, which cannabis is level 1 scheduled, which means there's no medical use, it's at the same level as heroin and crack, then you cannot take advantage of business deductions. So now cannabis businesses, like, okay, different than an ice cream truck. If you make $10 as an ice cream truck, let's just say it's $10, and let's say your only expense, let's say you spend $2 on ice cream and $5 on your staff. So that's $7 between your ice cream costs and your staff, and you have $10, your income is $3. So therefore, you just have to pay taxes on the $3. That's all you owe taxes on. So your tax bill should only be, let's call it $1. You only owe $1 of taxes. Okay, let's use the same example, but it's cannabis. You make $10, your materials cost you $2, and then you spend $5 on payroll. So under Section 280E, those $5 that you spent on payroll, that can't be deducted. Perhaps the $2 can be deducted. Let's just say that you can. And then your $3 of income absolutely is taxable. So from there, you now have income of $8. So instead of the $3, you're now paying taxes on $8. And now for your $8, you're now paying $4. You're now paying $4 in taxes, sometimes $5 to $6 in taxes, depending on if you can even deduct your cost of ice cream. And so you're left with basically no money at the end. I mean, it's very inefficient to run a business. Your net pay is much worse, and the structure that you have to put into place, and this is kind of what I work on quite a bit, is costly. Like it's costly to put these structures, and there's structures to mitigate your tax liability.
Sure.
But also, I saw an interesting article about, is the cost for you to mitigate your tax liability more costly than your cost to actually pay your taxes because of the amount of professional service providers you need to hire, death by fee, complex organizational structures. Oh, yeah. And so you have this environment where many cultivators, retailers, manufacturers are making a short-term, economically rational decision to engage in illegal cannabis commerce, where guess what? I pay $0 in taxes, and if I make $10 and my materials are $2 and my staff is $5, I pocket the $3.
Yeah.
So that, or pocket all the money. So that's, in the case of cannabis, you probably wouldn't even pay the $5 to your staff.
Yeah,
it's cannabis. You just tell them you're going to pay them down the road, and sorry times are tough. You know, it's funny. The guys are always skinny and tell you sorry times are tough. You always catch them driving a luxury car and eating at Nobu and Malibu. So.
I mean, times are tough for you. That's
yes. So there is money. It's just who knows where it is. And so this federal system has been in place for a long time, and there's a large political movement, but due to partisanship and intra-party fighting on the Democratic side of the aisle, there's been no congressional reform over this. Congress knows this is a problem. It makes operating your business incredibly inefficient. And because of partisanship, I would say intra-party partisanship. So the issue isn't Republican versus Democrat on financial service legislation. It's Democrat versus Democrat on it. And it's beyond the tax deductions, Matt. It's being able to use a regular bank account. It's having a
big time,
credit card. It's getting a mortgage. It's getting a loan at sub 20%.
Right.
And Cory Booker knows this is a problem, and he knows businesses are suffering, and he knows that there's more violence and criminality from it. And Chuck Schumer knows this is true. And they know that people, I mean, I'm working with a delivery license in Tarzana, and there's 4 illegal shops. And, you know, one person who is a bud tender at one of the illegal shops across the street from the legal operation I'm working on with 3 months ago was shot in the head and killed. You know, Cory Booker and Chuck Schumer know this is a problem. However, they have played a partisan game or a political game where Cory Booker has said there needs to be real social justice reform. There needs to be real social equity. There needs to be African-American empowerment in any legislation. Otherwise, there's no financial services. Chuck Schumer has said, I'm with Cory Booker, as Cory Booker is incredibly politically important, is a star of the Democratic Party and a top fundraiser for them. And also Chuck Schumer knows that the social equity, racial identity politics is a bread and butter for his political party right now. So Schumer says, I'm with Booker. No standalone financial services can be passed. And then Sherrod Brown, who's the chair of the Senate Banking Committee, he's a senior senator now from Ohio with the retirement of Rob Portman. Sherrod Brown says, I'm with them. I don't want big cannabis to win. I don't want the big money to win. So therefore, I oppose all financial services without social equity. So financial services called safe banking has passed the House of Representatives 7 times. And
wow.
I know, right? 7 times the charm is what Earl Perlmutter once said. And so they know this is a constant problem, and we'll see if Biden's pardoning of the 2,500 federal offenders for possession is sufficient for them to pass legislation in the lame duck. I don't think so. And so this will continue to be a problem into a Republican Congress, and we'll see how the Republicans react on the issue. I tend to like to speak to more Republican crowds, Matt, on cannabis. I like to engage and write on a more, and not that it's necessarily in line with my personal politics, but I just think it's more important. We don't need more activists. We don't need more thought leaders to make the Democratic, progressive, liberal case for cannabis. They already agree with you anyway, and most of those states have legalized. What we need is the conservative case for cannabis, which I think is much more powerful and much more salient because it's about, you know, individual rights, states' rights, not having the government tell you what to do, new industries, agriculture, made in America, so on and so forth. And frankly, the Republicans would offer a lower tax rate than the Democrats. Like Schumer's legislation, it was 25% excise tax, which cannabis would have the largest excise tax of any product in the United States by 3 times under the Democrats' proposed legislation, the CAOA. Under Nancy Mace, under her legislation, which is interesting, called the States Reform Act, it's like a 2.5%, 3.5% tax rate. So if I'm a business owner, I'm like, I'd rather go the Republican approach where I'm only paying 3.5%.
Right. Well, first off, you explained 280E far better than any piece of literature I've read, any other pundit, any talking head. So my hat's off to you. And incidentally, I think I learned of you from your writing first, which listeners out there, Zander's writing is exceptional. I remember reading some of your blog sorry, your
articles.
Sorry, I don't mean to. And it was clear and it was heavy with facts. So I think that's the lawyer in you. It wasn't as heavy on emotions, you know, which I would tend to do, but it was easy to read and actionable. So first off, thank you for doing that. And then I'd like to get your take on a pretty crude analogy I've used. And it references kind of the situation you're talking about with Chuck Schumer and Cory Booker. Like when I was younger, like a lot of kids, you play basketball, you play something outside. If someone say I brought the ball and someone called a foul on me, I'd say, well, I'm going to take my ball and go home and none of us get to play. Does this analogy hold with what Schumer and Booker are doing in that they're trying to get all this kind of wonderful stuff? I think a lot of people would agree, like it's a good goal, but once it goes away, like once they sign it or they're safe banking, it's kind of like they have to take their ball and go home, and they can't like hold this again. They can't hold us hostage to this. Like, what say you?
So I think that analogy that you're drawing is exactly how Sherrod Brown and Cory Booker, and I'm not going to lump in Chuck Schumer because I think Chuck Schumer is, and I've said this before on other broadcasts, I think in fine office, I agree with him on a number of issues. Chuck Schumer, and I mean this in the most descriptive way, is a political animal.
Mm-hmm.
Chuck Schumer does not care about this. Like, Chuck Schumer cares. I'm trying to think about what you could possibly care less about, but Chuck Schumer does not care about this issue. He cares about it to the extent it'll get Democrats votes in November. I think Cory Booker does care about this issue, and that's what his real concern is, that you guys are just going to take your ball, you're going to go home, and that's it. However, and this is also where cannabis activists and trade associations, which I think have been largely ineffective and non-impressive. Like I thought originally I was going to work for a trade association in cannabis. That would be the most obvious move from AIPAC, which is essentially a trade association, to another one in cannabis. But what I found is they're just like, they weren't mature. They tend to be fame seekers for the principles of it. They tend to be a way to make money for the principles of the trade association. And there's no concerted communications or policy strategy. If I were doing it, if I were advising cannabis activists, and if I were advising people that really want to see this done, and this is to the crux of your point, I would say you think about legislation as like a Christmas tree, and then you hang ornaments on that tree, but you can't put up the tree with all the ornaments already hung on it. Just like, let's get enabling legislation passed, let's do that, and then later on it'll become a bill, and it'll become regulation that I can now change. I can hang proverbial ornaments on the tree. Mm-hmm. Like at AIPAC, almost a decade ago, pro-Israel movement and AIPAC and our friends in Congress passed the Strategic Partnership Act. We had no idea what that was going to be at the time, but it was just elevated Israel to the level of major strategic partner. That's the Christmas tree. The ornaments were, visa waivers, tunnel detection technology, joint research and development over cancer therapeutics, alternative energy investment and joint research. Like, that all came later. The first thing was the Enabling Act. And so with cannabis, everyone's trying to do everything everywhere all at once.
Yeah.
I just say, let's just do one thing once really well, and then we can calibrate it. And I get that you don't want to help out big cannabis. And you can say this because I'm not currently working with an MSO. I understand if I am Cory Booker and I see the leadership of multi-state operators that appear in public, or single state operators who either have the money flash, sexual assault issues, spouses that are going to federal prison in their places, and one an MSO.
Yeah.
I get it. I want to see those people having to compete meaningfully and in a real way with mom and pop shops like the next person. Mm-hmm. However, like, the industry is really failing in a lot of states, and even in California, which is the world's largest market, like I've been a part of a number of transactions that have failed now because of either financing, or now the markets are crashing, or revenues aren't what people thought they would. So I can't employ them loud enough, like past financial services. Like, let's just put up the tree. We'll worry about the ornaments later.
I agree. And I love that a Jewish kid from Minnesota can use a Christmas tree analogy to discuss cannabis taxation improvements. God bless America.
It's a wide tent. It's a wide tent because it's all friends and potential friends, Matt. It's all friends and potential friends.
And that's there are plenty of negatives about the cannabis business, but I think by far my favorite, and you're perfect example of this, Zander, is when I cold call, and when I usually don't do it for sales reasons. If I'm just like, I want to know something, or I want to know you, way more often than not, people are receptive, they're friendly, they're cool, they're personable. In any other industry I've worked in, whether it's financial services, comedy, what have you, I haven't seen that. So people, I mean, there's a lot that kind of sucks about the cannabis business, but I think the people by far, and what you're saying is absolutely true. It's a wide tent. There's people who are incredibly liberal. There are people walking hand in hand with people who are fiscally conservative, and everywhere in between. It's like one of the few bipartisan issues left. And I think that's really cool.
And it should be. And I think that too often it just becomes like a liberal progressive party, or it just tends to skew that way politically. And it's to the movement's detriment. Like, it's all bipartisanship is the key. Do you want a strong, durable movement that will survive a Republican Congress, a Democratic Congress? I mean, Congress has changed more times. The House and the Senate have changed more times in the last 20 years than they have changed hands over the entire 20th century in America. I mean, wow. Think about that. Like, the amount of times power has changed. I mean, I can just go back to when Obama was elected. I mean, the House has changed hands probably 4 to 6 times. The Senate's changed hands 4 times. I mean, it's crazy. So let's have a concerted bipartisan strategy. The problem tends to be the people who are pushing it. And I go back to the issues with the trade associations and the political actors in the space. And what I'd say is, at a very high level, there is, and I'm going to say this in the most diplomatic way possible. If you're listening and you are a very qualified and accomplished government affairs expert in another industry, please consider joining cannabis. We could use your help. So we're lacking in human capital and intellectual capital. And then at the same time, there's a lack of willing to invest in this on the operator side. Like, when I started meeting with the operators and told them what I did, they were like, "Oh, you're a cost center." Mm-hmm. Okay. There was one operator that shall not be named that I've worked with. And when I first met with them, they said that you're a cost center. It's a little too expensive for us. Sorry. And then they got a letter that they were going to get a license revoked at a dispensary that they were making tens of millions of dollars a year. And then all of a sudden they come to me and they're like, "Well, we need your help because of this." And it's like, well,
that flipped quickly.
I was like, well, you can't build an army on the day you need it. Mm-hmm. You can't build an organization on the day you need it. And unfortunately, this is the day that you need it, and you can't do it cheaply. And so I wish that if operators would invest in relationships with regulators, with government, and do it in a really concerted way. One person who's doing this well right now, Adam Smith from the Alliance for Sensible Markets, is currently unlocking interstate trade between states, and he's doing it all through state lobbying. And there's huge legislation. The most important cannabis legislation that California has ever passed recently about since legalization, which that was a ballot initiative. It wasn't enabling legislation, but it was Governor Newsom signing authorization legislation to engage in interstate trade. States moving biomass to another state, and that's at a state-to-state level. And Adam has been investing in state and local relationships forever. Now we're in the fundraising stage, and it's kind of one of those issues. And I go through this also for my own private equity deals. It's like the story of the chicken and the pie. Chicken wants to bake a pie, so he goes around and he asks everyone, "Hey, can you help me find ingredients?" And they say, "Well, I'm really busy. I can't help you find ingredients, but come to me, in a couple of days and update me on how it goes." And he goes, "Okay." And then he goes back, he found all the ingredients. He says, "Okay, now I need help baking it. I found all the ingredients, I need to bake it." And everyone says to him, "Oh, well, I'm too busy. I can't do it right now, but I love what you're doing. I love pie. Let me know how it goes." And then once he bakes the pie, he goes to everyone, and everyone goes, "Well, of course I'll bake the pie. I've been with you since day one, and so I'm happy to eat the pie." And there's a lot of this free rider problem in cannabis as it relates to this that, and I actually think he has a really smart perspective on it. So I was going to use one example, and I was like, wait, actually, no, he's been supportive. But there are other examples of cultivators who are like, well, we'll just wait. Yeah. We're waiting for interstate commerce, waiting for trade. Then we say, okay, it's ready now. Can you cut a check for $50,000 for us to unlock another state? And it's just no. But we'll wait for it to get unlocked, and then we'll eat.
Yeah. Well, that's a good transition to my next question. If there was one thing you could realistically change and you didn't have to go through the normal legislative procedures, what would it be?
Well, the obvious one would be, I'm just going to lump the obvious ones in together and I'm going to put it aside because I think that's a less interesting point. The obvious one is I think cannabis should be descheduled and not rescheduled, but descheduled, take it off the schedule and put it in the hands of the FDA. And that will unlock interstate commerce, interstate trade, everything that you want, financial services. I think that's the big one. If I could change one kind of not obvious thing about the cannabis industry in general that people don't see, it would probably be in the ease of distribution and direct-to-consumer sales. If there was a way, and that might not be a policy or reg thing, I mean, it is because you need to give source comfort, but if cannabis is actually going to turn into what we think it will and what we hope it will, which is a dominant, I'm not going to say dominant because I've worked in other industries and I know what dominant industries are. Cannabis, I don't think will ever be this is not grain. This is not gasoline.
It's not the defense industry.
This is not weapons, missiles, or mortars.
Yeah.
But for it to be something that my mom, who's a 71-year-old excuse me by saying her age, but a mature neurologist who's older, for her to decide to throw that in her shopping cart, she's going to need to go to Target and buy 5 other items, and cannabis is an impulse item, and she can put it on her American Express.
Yeah.
And once that happens, that's when it becomes much more that's when it becomes a real much more real industry. When you can buy it at Target, when those channels for purchase are easier, and it's starting to creep. Like I saw a news release today, Matt. There was and the thing is there's nothing actually newsworthy that happens in cannabis. There's just kind of deceptive press releases or kind of press releases where you're like, wait, what? What's actually going on? Well, it was like Uber is delivering cannabis and it's like, no, Uber's not. Leafly is doing it in partnership with Uber. But I saw GTI, they announced they're creeping towards it. They're like, we're now partnering with Circle K gas stations that have thousands of locations across the country, and I think they're international. And I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. So I can just go, and then it's like 20 locations in Florida. And I was like, well, that's interesting. I can now go into it because the press release is like, where people go and they buy gum and they buy candy and their gasoline, and now they can buy
cigarettes,
cigs. And now you take a look at it, and I'm like, actually, no, they're just like, it seems like they're entering into a real estate deal for a lot next door, and they have a medical license in Florida. So they just have an anchor tenant as a gas station. That's what the actual thing that is happening. It's just they have a better anchor tenant and they're just next to a gas station. So I thought that was interesting at first because I was like, yeah, that's how we can start selling a lot of product. Like if I can just buy it at a gas station. So that would be the big thing that I would change.
That makes a lot of sense. And what's something you're most optimistic about regarding the cannabis industry?
I go back to relationships. I think that from when I entered the industry in 2019, which it might not sound long, but in this industry, it's like every year is like a dog year. Like it is like I have gray hairs on the side of it. That's why I shave the side of my head because it looks good. But I think that the quality of people and the quality of human capital and the seriousness of people coming into the space, like, look, I'm in LA. There's always the son of a scion rich guy who has a ton of cash who decides to start a cannabis brand where there's no business acumen, no nothing other than someone along your family line decided to work, decided to make money. So we're moving a little further away from that. And I see over the years, like quality people coming in from other industries who are serious about building this as a brand, as a real vertical, who have some type of a personal story or a personal connection. I'm someone where I actually don't, it's interesting to know people's connection to cannabis, but it's okay to me, like if you don't have a really strong personal connection to be in the industry. Like I don't know how your love of getting high or how it might be medicine for you I don't take that into consideration when I assess your skills as an accountant or as a lawyer, or as a packaging expert, or as a store manager. A store manager might be different because of who you're interfacing with, but that's different. But the quality of people are getting a lot better and a lot more serious, and I think that we're all going to be winners for it.
We'll all get to eat the pie, hopefully. Well, where can people learn more about you and what you're doing?
So you can find me at www.cannabispolicyforum.com, and I'm also active on Twitter at Zander Abrams. I've had my head down working on a large private equity deal somewhere in the United States that I can't say, but been working on this now for a year. So I haven't been as active in thought leadership, but cannabispolicyforum.com, at Zander Abrams on Twitter. I'm totally accessible if anyone wants to connect or talk or just opine about cannabis. It's something that I find the policy incredibly interesting, Matt. Like, I find the industry very interesting. Like, I got an interesting job offer to leave the industry about 6-8 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it would have been a track to become a senior executive at a company doing over $1.2 billion a year with a couple thousand employees, and is someone who I have a long-term relationship with. They asked me my thoughts on it. Like, we were getting coffee, and he asked me my thoughts on it, and if I wanted to move over, and it would have been, frankly, a lot more lucrative. It would have been more established. But when I did an inventory on like the product and what they do, I just didn't have the passion for it. Like, this is something that I find very interesting. I have a lot of passion for it. And to the extent that any of your listeners are also interested on the topic or like it or work in this space and want to connect, would be happy to.
Well, Zander, you're always welcome on this podcast. Thank you for joining us, and can't wait to have you back.
Anytime, Matt, anytime.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Matt Balaker podcast. To learn more, please check out mattbalaker.com and encourage your friends to like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate it.